Today on Between the Lines, a groundbreaking approach to understanding creativity with Sir Ken Robinson. Welcome, I'm Barry Kibrick. Sir Ken was knighted by Queen Elizabeth for his pioneering work in the development of creativity and his service to the arts. Now with an updated version of his best-selling classic, Out of Our Minds, Sir Ken gives us a revolutionary way of understanding creativity in order for us to meet the extraordinary challenges of the 21st century.
Between the Lines with Barry Kibrick is made possible in part by
the government of Puerto Rico's tourism company, encouraging viewers to take a break and relax with a good book. Every page brings a new and exciting experience. Puerto Rico, cell phones optional.
I'm a writer today because I was a reader when I was 11 years old, and it was...
You do not need to prove your state of happiness to anybody.
Most of these speeches were as much as a month in preparation.
Characters, the heroes in this book, are seekers of truth in a story that involves a lot of corruption.
You don't get a chance to really talk about what's real, and it's the purpose of the movie.
So Ken, it is a privilege to have you here on the show. Thank you for joining us on Between the Lines today.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you, Barry.
You know, this book was originally written 10 years ago, and just a few moments ago I said to you, you should have just rewrote another book, because I can tell from this version, this is completely new. Everything in here is really geared to us where we are now, not where we were 10 years ago.
Yeah, well, that's right. I wrote it 10 years ago, and about a year ago, the publisher contacted me and said, you know, it's 10 years coming up since the book came out, and we'd like to do a new edition, and would you like to make any changes? So I thought, well, I'll take a look at it, and honestly, I had in mind a weekend with a spell check, you know, and a bottle of claret, and I thought I'll hand polish the odd metaphor here and there. But actually, I rewrote the entire book. It is effectively a new book. It's not that the argument has been completely changed, but the way I present it, I think it's clearer, I think it's more cogent, there's much more in it now. And there are two reasons really, Barry. One was that so much has happened in 10 years since the book came out. I mean, 10 years ago, you know, Google was a novelty for most people. There were no smartphones, no iPods, no iPads, there were no social media. We hadn't had 9/11. If you think of what's happened in the last 10 years, and although I think the arguments of the book are not only addressed to this moment, you know, they have a deeper resonance, the situation is so different. I felt I had to bring it up to date, and also I've done a lot in 10 years, and I wanted to bring that into the book.
But that key premise is here, and I want to hit on that, and that is your mission. I think I can say this clearly. Your mission to make us appreciate the depth of our creative potential that has gotten somewhat stifled. And your mission is to make us realize that depth of what creativity I want everyone to be certain of, and you're very clear here. We're not talking about creativity as just someone who's a writer, an artist. We're talking about creativity in our everyday lives. Mm-hmm. The lawyer who's creative, the businessman who's creative, the teacher, the plumber, the garbage man. It doesn't matter. But it's important for us at this time especially to tap into that depth of creativity that we're capable of.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's right. See, I think, well, firstly, there are a lot of misconceptions about creativity. As you say, people often think it's all about the arts. Well, I'm a tireless advocate of the arts, especially in education. I think the fact that the arts are being cut out of education programs in schools is a catastrophe. And I try to say why that is in the book. But it's not just about the arts. You can be creative at anything. And to me, creativity is the gift of being human. It's what makes us different. It's what sets us apart from the rest of life on Earth. Actually, very little does, in my experience and my view. You know, in many respects, we're like every other form of life on Earth. Our life is short, perishable, mortal. We depend on the Earth for all it provides for us to be here at all. But in this respect, we're different. You know, biologically, we may be evolving at the same rate as everything else, but culturally, we're in a completely different category. And it's because we have this powerful capacity for imagination to bring into mind other possibilities, to bring to mind things that aren't here in front of us. And creativity comes from that. It's the power to apply your imagination and to create new and to make new things. So I think that's something that we should recognize at the heart of everything that we do. And I believe we should put it at the center of education.
And that's why you just said it, it's that applied creativity. Oftentimes we think of creativity almost as formless, and in a sense you make it clear here that in a strange way, the tighter the form, the more we surround ourselves with almost obstacles, the deeper our creativity can become. And it's got to be combined with these other things, as you say, imagination, creativity, and innovation. Mm-hmm. We can't leave the creativity at the doorstop. We must take that creativity and apply it. We must create the new things that we need to be the citizens we must become.
Well, that's exactly right. You know, there was a report published by IBM a few months ago, and they asked 3,000 heads of organizations around the world what are their main priorities in running their companies or their organizations. And they said that there are three. One is, how do you run organizations that can deal with complexity? Because the world is becoming more and more complicated in all sorts of ways. We might talk about that, but I think there are revolutionary forces at work in the world now, which means that we're facing challenges that we've never faced before as a species. So the world's getting more complicated. Secondly, the CEO said, well, how do you run organizations that are adaptable so that you can respond to change? And the third priority, they said, was creativity. How do you run organizations that are regularly and systematically creative? Well, the reason I quote this is that if heads of corporations and companies around the world are saying that creativity matters more than anything else, that it's a bottom line issue, then this isn't just some whimsical, romantic theme, that I'm trying to peddle. It's fundamental, to how we live our lives, to how we run our businesses, our economies. So what I've tried to show in the book is the continuity between imagination, creativity, and innovation. And to say that, the fact is everybody has a good idea from time to time. I think what we need to do is to have them regularly and systematically and depend upon it and rely upon it. And that's what I think I'm trying to tackle.
And the rewrite, I got the gist of it because you realize we are in a time now where, as you say, we're ready for a paradigm shift. Mm-hmm. And that paradigm shift is always, it's very funny, we think of it as always coming from the creative mind, and it does, but you give us one more thing here. It also comes out of a need. It's as if that old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. We now have a necessity, due to the structure of our societies, to take this creativity and literally, if all of us together bring up this wellspring, that's when that paradigm shift has a potential of occurring.
Yes, that's right. And you see, the thing is that one of the things that is true of human beings is that we don't see the world directly as it is. We see the world through a kind of veil of ideas and of values, of concepts, of beliefs. And it's why two people looking at the same events may have very different opinions about what went on there and very different views about what the implications are, because we live in very different mindsets. It was a wonderful quote, I think, from Anais Nin, who once said that, I do not see the world as it is, I see it as I am. And I think what she means by that is that we all have our frames of our perspectives that we bring. Well, the thing is, that is the consequence of being inherently creative beings, that we create ideas and concepts and values and ways of seeing. And that's what creates a paradigm. We live in a framework of shared ideas for a while, and then we start to see things differently. It shifts the whole ground. And I believe that it's this power of creativity that's now generated all kinds of challenges that we can only confront, not by backing away from our creative powers, but by investing in them more deeply.
In fact, you use a quote from Lincoln at one of his speeches, who says, because we are so entrenched in our beliefs from another era. And his words were, we must disenthrall ourselves. And you personally love that word, disenthrall. and I love it too, because Richard Dawkins calls it these memes, and Rebecca Costa called them super memes, these concepts that we take as truth, whether they are or not. They're beliefs that we have had and we can't seem to get out of them. And that line, disenthrall, that's what we need to do. If we're going to reach that paradigm shift, we must become disenthralled with the ideas of the past. Not everything. In other words, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, as they say. There are certain values from our past that we want to keep and cherish, but there are things that we want to move forward on with. And that is where, again, you want us to release that creativity.
Yeah, that's right. You're right, I love that speech from Lincoln. And that particular word, disenthrall, because what it means is that there are ideas and attitudes and beliefs that we are hypnotized by. That's what being enthralled is, isn't it? It's being captivated, so you're kind of frozen into them. And we have to shake it off. It's like waking yourself up, from a dream. And we have to shift our consciousness. And I think that is what we need to do right now. I think there are a lot of the ways we've had of thinking about the world are simply inadequate.
Well, you hit home runs on that when you talk about our education. We're also focused on standards. And you specifically tell us, be careful about being focused on those standards, because those standards we are focused on may be those things from that other generation that we need to become disenthralled with. So it's not so much focusing on the standards. And by the way, you're not saying throw the standards by the wayside or anything. We want to make standards as high as they can be and expectations as great as they can be. But we have to be careful, because we need, again, a new concept of what education is before we just stick to certain standards. That's the big change you want to see.
It is. I mean, education is massive as a set of issues for it. There was a great quote I have in the book from H.G. Wells, who said, a long time ago now, but he said that civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. And I believe that's true, that it's education that we depend upon to give ourselves and our children, our students, the skills, the attitudes, the ideas, the information that they need to become who they can be themselves, but also to live in the world and make it a better place.
Well, you say, and I love this, I became enthralled with, not disenthralled, with it's really more important to kindle the flame than to fill the vessel. And right now, the way we're looking at standards oftentimes is that vessel being filled rather than is that flame being kindled? Because that is where the creativity starts from. It's that kindling of the flame. And I think you used this line, we're not supposed to be teaching subjects, we're supposed to be teaching students how they themselves can then learn and kindle and go on and fill our society with these new creative ideas that we need to make the shifts we need.
Yes, I'd love to own that quote, but I do quote it. I think the full quote is that education is not about filling empty vessels, but lighting fires. And you're right. I think what happens is that this culture of standardized testing, of trying to fill people up with information, has the effect actually of dousing the flame completely. It just puts it out. But you're right, it's not, to me, an argument against standards in schools at all. Obviously not. Actually, it's
raising them higher to a certain extent. It's creating more of a demand. I know that sounds funny, but it really is.
But it is. When people are engaged imaginatively in the work they do, if they're given creative challenges, they achieve at a much higher level. You see that in every field. You see it in science, you see it in sport, you see it in the arts. I was at an event a couple of days ago with Tony Hawk, the
skateboarder,
right?
Yeah.
Brilliant guy. And he started out just because his brother gave him an old skateboard. Well, cut to 30 years later, and he's the head of a multi-billion-dollar world sporting empire. Because he could do this thing on the skateboard. But of course, not everybody who gets on a skateboard ends up in his position. And he said he wasn't especially good at it either to start with. In fact, he kept falling off it. But he was enamored of it, and it ignited his imagination, his passion. And the reason I'm saying this is that to be alive is creative. Now, you can dull that, and people can get trapped and stalled and becalmed in an old way of seeing things. But it seems to me so fundamental that the challenges we face in future are so unpredictable, so unforeseeable, that we have to invest in our creative powers. And that's not, as I say, whimsical. It's a hard-headed attitude, but it has big implications for how we educate people, there's no question.
Well, one of those implications, and you just said it, Tony Hawk, how many times did he fall off the skateboard? One of the things you want in our education system is to literally kindle the flames of not being afraid to fail. Because the only time these shifts happen, whether it's Einstein shift or an Edison shift with the light bulb, is how many failures they had to go through. And this is something that we're not really that open to yet. And this is a shift we really need to become comfortable with, is that it is wonderful to fail as long as you just keep getting up and failing. Because eventually it's only through those failures that you could possibly come upon the right filament to put in the light bulb, the right concept to understand the universe.
I once worked with a guy who won the Nobel Prize for chemistry, and I asked him how many of his experiments failed, and he said most of them, probably 90%. He said, but of course, failure is not really the word for it. I mean, what you're finding out is what doesn't work, and that's true in every field. I mean, if you look at sports people, athletes, practicing, the number of times they get it wrong before they get it right. If you look at composers working on music, or somebody learning an instrument, or mathematicians crossing things out and trying it a different way, it's the natural way of it. To be creative involves a series of approximations, of attempts, of false starts. And the big problem, I think, in schools right now is that there is a culture of stigmatizing mistakes. In fact, organizations do it too. That people are penalized for getting things wrong, and it makes them risk averse. And the result is that they lose touch with their creative possibilities.
Yeah, that I see that as one of the biggest faux pas we make, and one of the biggest shifts we need to make. And you also see it, there was a part that I rather than looking at creativity in this sort of ethereal manner, you do look at it as a very practical manner. And part of the practicality comes with what you called the connectivity. I want to read this exactly. You say that the education, in fact, in particular when it comes to creativity, is to do so on a personal, cultural, and economic level, and understanding how they are interconnected is the key. We so much now, in fact, part of why arts are not in the schools as much is because we don't consider them as important as sciences and math. That's what you bring out here. And for us to not connect all of these things, what did you use the example? It's sort of like a left brain. If you're an athlete and you're a runner and you're only exercising your right leg and not your left leg, you're not going to run very well. So we do need to exercise all of these things, see how they're related in our economics, our personal goals, our educational goals. That's what's really missing. And again, doesn't it seem like such an easy change, and yet the resistance is amazing?
Well, you know, if you take, I mean, I live in America now, so so I'm not taking a cheap shot here. You know, it's not like I flew in to say this. I've lived here for 10 years. But the system of public education in America at the moment has an average dropout rate of 30%. That's to say, about 30% of kids who start the 9th grade don't complete the 12th grade. And it's higher in some socioeconomic communities, it's higher in different parts of the country, it's higher in different cultural groups, but on average it's about 30%. That's a dreadful waste and indictment. And the reason is, I mean, every kid has their own story. That's a big part of what I'm saying in the book. You know, we're all different. But broadly, I think you can say that the reason people drop out of school is because they don't feel it's relevant to them. It just doesn't connect. They don't think it's about them. And what's happened, I think, here in our public education system is the curriculum has become more and more narrow. It's become more and more obsessed with standardizing and less about students. And in the end, education is personal. You know, it was for you, it was for me, and it's because we're all different. We have different aptitudes, different sensibilities, different dispositions, different possibilities. And so what I'm arguing there, when we talk about getting back to basics in education, there are these. There are economic basics. We want education to prepare people to become economically independent and to make a contribution. Well, to do that, we have to look at the real economy that's out there now, not the old industrial economy that the present education system was designed for. The second big priority is cultural. We want education to equip our students to live in this world and to understand their own values and the values of other people. We want them to be culturally literate. But the third one, and it's the fundamental one, is personal. In the end, none of that will work if we don't engage people, if we don't get them intrigued and challenged. That's the personal, but education is always and inevitably personal, and that's what we're losing.
Well, you know, I did literally yesterday an entire show with the president of the LAUSD's Board of Education, and her entire message was for that 100% graduation rate, to create it so that all the children feel that desire. And you can see already that dropout rate in that school was phenomenally, already in the 80%, not dropout, 80% graduation, and going higher and higher. And I read this great study about China, and they were talking about China and how if mathematically ranking, the students in China were like number 1 and we were number 27. Mm-hmm. But the truth of the matter is, and here's where I'll come even more strongly in the defense of America, if I might, we educate everyone. Mm-hmm. China does not. We do our very best to bring all our children up to the highest level, and yet I agree, we're still having this problem doing it. There's no doubt about it.
Well, what's interesting to me about China is that that Shanghai was the first Chinese district to be part of this program of international student assessment, PISA. And
so
you're right.
By the way, so they brought everybody that was great in math into Shanghai, and they tested that one group. That would be like all of us in the LAUSD taking the best and the brightest into El Camino and just testing that group, and then saying, we'd be number 1, I guarantee you.
Well, they say that, you see. What they say is, you know, that we've come out number 1 in maths and science. Well, of course we did, because we drill these kids relentlessly to be good at these things. And if we didn't come out top, we'd be really worried, because that's the entire focus of what we're doing. However, they said, that's not the point. They said in Shanghai, the school district people there said, you know, we're good at this, but we know this isn't the right thing to be good at. What we want to do in China is to help our children to become more creative, like you do in America.
Oh, isn't that great? I love it. In fact, on many of those surveys, and that's why I get a sense. Let me ask you this: I get a sense we are close to making that paradigm shift, only because so many minds are thinking on the same plane like this. Are you getting? When I'm careful to read these books, I get a sense of the reality being more optimistic than pessimistic. Even though the struggle may be great, I get a sense that we're up to the challenge.
Well, I am optimistic, and but I am naturally, you know. But I think it's important to be optimistic, but it's equally important not to be complacent, because there are serious obstacles in the way of making this shift. You know, that really what makes the difference in education is the quality of teaching. And that's about who we hire, how they're trained, how they're rewarded, and how they're motivated. And that's a big hill to climb just now. And I say it because what governments tend to do is look at the curriculum and look at assessment. And to me, the really important thing is the process of teaching and learning. And that's why the subtitle of the book is, it's called Out of Our Minds, but the subtitle is Learning to be Creative. Because I believe, from everything I've ever done, that we can teach people to be more creative, like we can teach them to be literate or numerate. We can do that, but we have to make it a priority.
Well, Sir Ken, our time is up, and I'm going to end with your words just on that line. Helping people to connect with their personal creative capacities is the surest way to release the best they have to offer. Thank you so much, Sir Ken, for helping us release the best within us.
Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. And thank you guys for joining us. Now, before Sir Ken leaves, I'd like to leave you with these words from Out of Our Minds. It is through feelings as well as through reason that we find our real creative power. It is through both that we connect with each other and create the complex, shifting worlds of human culture. I'm Barry Kibrick. Between reason and feeling lays our true creative power. Connect with it and with each other, and we will shift human culture for the better. Thank you so much, Sir Ken.
Great pleasure, Ray. Thank you.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, want a DVD or transcript of our show, catch an episode online, or receive our weekly updates, go to www.klcs.org/VTL. Between the Lines with Barry Kibrick is made possible in part by
The government of Puerto Rico's tourism company, dedicated to the island lifestyle, encouraging viewers to take a break and relax with a good book. Read, rejuvenate. Puerto Rico, the novel island.
Creativity is the gift of being human. It's what makes us different. It's what sets us apart from the rest of life on Earth.
On this episode of Between the Lines, Sir Ken Robinson. With his best-selling classic Out of Our Minds, Sir Ken gives us a revolutionary way of understanding creativity in order for us to meet the extraordinary challenges of the 21st century.